We've thought of our beautiful world, and yet a world where there is so much sadness and so much persecution. The fourth presentation where we're looking at persecution in our world today. At the end of the last presentation I suggested 6 possible reasons for the abuse of people. Those in leadership in other religions or politically are insecure. They are afraid. And indeed, the numbers of those following Jesus is growing rapidly. So they fear their power base will be threatened. It's a wrong fear, but that's the way they think. In many countries there is a political policy or a religious policy coming from politics or religion, but limiting what any religious group can do, and it so often militates against the followers of Jesus. Because many governments and many religions want to enforce conformity to their system. And in other parts of the world, the followers of Jesus are resisting corruption, the abuse of drugs, human trafficking, the exploitation of women or resources. And these followers of Jesus are ruthlessly put down by those who fear that their power base and their source of money will be curtailed. Some of the reasons for persecution in our world today. What's the scale of the persecution? Indeed, what's the scale of martyrdom? What does it mean? And what's the source of the martyrdom? And news organization. At the moment, 100 million followers of Jesus are estimated to be being persecuted right now. And that figure is consistent with many other sources. Possibly 7,500 followers of Jesus are martyred for their faith each year. Some would put the figure higher, some a bit lower, but that's a kind of average figure. The difference between different groups in the figure is because of different ways of defining martyrdom. The 7,500 is probably an underestimate, if that's the description. That people are being killed because their way of life, the way of Jesus, they're resisting gross evils like drugs, exploitation, human trafficking. Simply because they're a follower of Jesus, known to be a follower of Jesus in a society where such people are not allowed. Or because they are witnessing to Jesus and seeking to spread his way. With that definition, at least 7,500 are being martyred each year. But the variation between sources depends on how they define martyrdom. Most of those who are martyred in secular, often totalitarian states, or under Islamic authorities. That's the main source of martyrdom today. That's not the only sources, there are others. There are those who have died at the hands of Hindus, occasionally Buddhists. But in general, that's the main 2 groups. There are those who die because they stand against gross evil. But mainly, today, that's the 2 main sources. Now remember, in persecution in the world, all persecution, 80% is directed against the followers of Jesus. So I'm unapologetic in focusing on that area. It dominates today in the world. If you look at the lands which are dominated historically by Christians, very often the Christian faith has declined in these lands in the West. Persecution of Muslims is rare. But if you go to the lands that are dominated by Muslims, persecution of Christians is common. It's a strange contradiction. But in the light of that, why all the accusations of Islamophobia that fly around the place? It's very clever media manipulation, and it does not fit the facts. You see, if you criticize Islam in any way, or question Islam in any way, A way to silence you is just to accuse you of being an Islamophobe. People don't like having these sort of labels hung around their necks. And I suspect the media is quite frightened of this. But the reverse. Muslims are allowed to question and criticize the faith of others. If the misrepresentation of Jesus, which is an insult to the Jesus of the followers of Jesus himself, if we acted like Muslims, we'd be murdering Muslims all over the place because they do it regularly. It's in their literature. But if the reverse happens, and if the media dares to question Islam or ridicule something, poke fun at it, people get killed. But certainly the accusation of Islamophobia is hurled at them. It's a strange irony, but it contradicts the facts. And I'm never quite sure why our media allow this misrepresentation of facts to persist. But why do the followers of Jesus get persecuted? Now you have to go back to the Qur'an. We've got to go back to the belief system that's laid out in the Qur'an. It's crystal clear. We have to go back to that because that gives us the clue as to what's going on. And in the Qur'an, there's a concept of superiority. A superiority for the Qur'an, a superiority for Islam, and a superiority for Muslims. Now let me illustrate this, because it underpins the whole basis of the persecution. I am taking verses from the Qur'an, I am interpreting them in the light of Islamic scholarship. I'm using an approved version of the Qur'an. So accusations that I have selected and misrepresented the truth don't stack up. The life of this world is but a sport and diversion. It is the life to come that is the true life. The Qur'an teaches that all over the place. You see, the key thing is to impress God by what we do, what we believe, so that we can get to paradise after death. This means that life on earth, relatively speaking, can be cheapened. It's not important. It's just a training, a preparation, a testing ground. That is unique to Islam. You don't find that in other religions. The basest creatures in the sight of God are the faithless who will not believe. Now that just means non-Muslims. We can go into the definition of what it means by faithless because the Qur'an spells it out. So non-Muslims are despised in God's eyes. That's a statement from God. They're little value. Well, if that's how people are treated, then there are consequences. God does not love unbelievers, non-Muslims. So if that's God's attitude, well, how should non-Muslims be treated then? Fight against them, that's the non-Muslims, until idolatry is no more and God's religion reigns supreme. Idolatry means that you believe in gods or God other than Allah. And the accusation against the followers of Jesus is that the followers of Jesus believe in three gods. Now, no Christian would ever accept that or believe that, but that's what is said. So we're idolaters. So anything is permissible with the aim of protecting and extending Islam. Because fight is in the context of physical fight. God's religion reigning supreme is the ultimate goal. Are they seeking a religion other than God's? That's Islam, where every soul in the heavens and the earth is submitted to him. That's Islam, willingly or by compulsion. He that chooses a religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted from him. That's what the Qur'an teaches in several places. So anyone who rejects Islam is doomed. We have no hope. Therefore, it is the responsibility of Muslims to put every possible pressure on people to force us to embrace Islam. It's logical. It's what the Qur'an teaches. God will bring to nothing the deeds of those who disbelieve, that's the non-Muslims. As for the faithful, that's the Muslims who do good works and believe in what has been revealed to Muhammad, he will ennoble their state. So non-Muslims can contribute nothing of long-term value. They're second-class citizens. God will bring to nothing the deeds of those who disbelieve. And that underpins a lot of so-called Islamic center scholarship today. And finally, those who embrace Islam pursue the right way, but those that do wrong shall become the fuel of hell. Now, every religion believes it's got the right way, but it doesn't just say that the others are just fuel of hell. But Islam says that, and it says it in several places in the Qur'an. We're valueless. Fuel for hell. Now it generates a culture, and that underpins the extremism that you see in Boko Haram or IS today. Let's move on. Summarizing this. Islam is totally right. All other religions are wrong. God accepts no religion other than Islam. Rejection of Islam means hell is the certain destiny. Now, those who follow any religion believe their religion is right. That's understandable. But this goes a lot further. It just writes off those who won't accept it. So the logical outcome of this is you should do everything possible to hinder the practice and expansion of any other religion. Now, if Christianity is expanding today, which it is in every continent outside the West, then every attempt should be put in to reduce that expansion, to hold it back, to make it impossible. It's logical. Islam claims it deals with every issue of life. So anyone serious about the big issues of life will embrace Islam, for that's God's perfect answer. That's clearly taught in the Qur'an. So there need to be penalties for rejecting it, because it has the answer, it holds the answer. So you penalize non-Muslims in society simply because they reject Islam. You want to put pressure on them to show them that Islam is the answer, and to make it so uncomfortable to be non-Muslims that they give in and they become Muslims. And that is a deliberate written policy in the Islamic world. He does not love non-Muslims. Friendship and trust is inappropriate. Non-Muslims must have no power. Non-Muslims are second-class citizens. That's what the Qur'an teaches. So you don't have equality before the law because we're not equal. Non-Muslims are fuel for hell. There is no scope for promotions in the society because they're inferior. And indeed, in many Islamic states, there is reduced access to education. But that keeps people uneducated or not Muslims and in poverty. And this encourages them to convert to Islam. Practice, it doesn't work. All activities of non-Muslims are essentially worthless. All activities of Muslims will bring value. So you don't allow non-Muslims scope for development, and you don't allow them any leadership. So you undermine the non-Muslim activities and keep non-Muslims in economic servitude. Now, that is the official teaching. Now, the vast majority of wonderful Muslim people throughout the world don't really follow that, or they follow it in only a limited way. Muslims are the same as any other people group in the world. The good, the bad, and the indifferent. But they're lovely people in many ways. In the same as in any culture and society, most people are lovely people. We're all made by God, and God did not make a mistake. But that's the official teaching, and it underpins, and then starts to influence minorities, who then move on to extremism and build in laws and build in positions in the Islamic states, which leads to persecution. It all stems back to the Qur'an. because that's a principle of the Qur'an, a principle of Islam. Islam is right. Nobody must be pulled away once they're in. You should pull people into it. That's our duty. So you're allowed to fight to protect Islam, and that's clearly taught, and you can see it in practice in parts of the world today. That's a norm in Islamic countries. Non-Muslims simply can't get promotion. They can't get key political positions. They can't get leadership in the structures and in the societies and the culture that's there. And the organizations, the businesses. It just is not possible. They can't get into leadership in education. It's ruled out. They can't become promoted in the army. And it's important. And it's these sort of teachings that stem directly from the Qur'an that build up an attitude of mind which, for a minority of Muslims, leads to the extremism. And it's that that attracts people to go to Syria today. You see, that's the ultimate goal. Now, most Muslims do it entirely peacefully. Wonderful people, and I respect them and love them. But it gives an excuse for minorities to abuse their power. And the idea that the extremists are not true Muslims, which is often put about by Muslim leaders in the West today, is simply not true. Those who are extremists are basing it on the Qur'an, and they're basing it correctly on the Qur'an, and they're taking it to its logical extremity. But most Muslims wouldn't share that. Inequality. God doesn't love unbelievers. Non-Muslims, God doesn't love us. The heirs of the fire, that's non-Muslims, the heirs of paradise are Muslims, shall not be held equal. So in the law courts of Sharia law courts and in many Islamic states, the testimony of a non-Muslim counts for less than a Muslim. Automatically the Muslim wins if it's a 1-to-1. And anyone who opposes Islam or the Prophet shall be brought low. And that's an excuse for violence against those who criticize. And indeed, friendship, many Muslims in the extreme groups will not become friends of those who are not Muslims. They will see them as enemies because they're opposing God and His Prophet, as the Qur'an teaches. Enforcing inequality, this is how it's done. Many Islamic states have an identity card system. Nothing wrong with that. But written on the identity card system, at the insistence of the Islamic leadership, is the religion. So if you go anywhere, use your identity card, and if it's not Muslim, automatically you lose out. You're at the end of the queue, or you don't get listened to by the police or a law court. In many Islamic states, places of worship that are not Islamic, and they're usually Christian churches, to build them or repair them requires permission. Permission is rarely granted. So it allows the fabric of the structures and the meeting places to slowly fall apart. Undermines other religions. Many Islamic states have brutal blasphemy laws. Pakistan is the extreme example, with an automatic death penalty attached. So if a Muslim accuses a non-Muslim of insulting Islam in some way, automatically, because the Muslim's witness in a court carries more weight, automatically the non-Muslim loses and is on death row for the rest of their life and is often exterminated by an attack. In a previous presentation I pointed out, in a country like Pakistan, and it's not unique to Pakistan, at a minimum level, 3 girls every day are kidnapped, raped by a Muslim, and married to their rapist. These are non-Muslim girls. And under Islamic law, the wife of a Muslim is automatically a Muslim. And all the children must be brought up as Muslims. That's a great way to undermine non-Muslims. And in Pakistan today, of the 3 girls, roughly 1 is a Hindu and 2 are followers of Jesus. And the parents have no rights before the police because the Muslims just deny it, and their testimony carries more weight. They get away with it, and they know they'll get away with it. An extra tax is applied to those who are not Muslims, which keeps non-Muslims and impoverishes them. They don't get access to equality in education. Often in schools, the non-Muslims are marked down. They don't get the top grades. When they go to university without the Islamiyat examination, which non-Muslims don't sit, they won't get in. There are not equal legal rights for the non-Muslims. And the legal rights for women are not equal. Again, that comes straight from Islamic law, Sharia law. In jobs, because of the identity cards, those who are not Muslims get passed over. Passed over for the job, passed over for promotion. And if you dare to leave Islam, and the leadership finds out, there'll be violent discrimination, perhaps to the point of execution. These things are all monitored throughout the world. And all kinds of organizations do this. I'm putting up 3 sets of facts. These are facts, not opinions, gathered by organizations from 3 different positions. Facts by people who are highly competent at gathering evidence. They are not exaggerations. In terms of inequalities and human rights, that are the facts. Now Islam has got to face this, and it's not facing this. Persecution in Islamic states is rife. Now most Muslims are not even aware of these things because it doesn't affect them. And they wouldn't use these laws. They're nice people, reasonable people. They're not aware of these things. They think they're made up by the West. I want to stress these are facts gathered by highly competent, reputable organizations. When I've challenged some of the Muslims, they just deny it's true. They deny that non-Muslims are treated badly in their countries. Their press is controlled, politics is controlled, or religion is controlled. They simply don't know. They'd be horrified if actually they found the facts. But they certainly won't accept my word for it. And when it comes to all these surveys, many Muslims just deny that they're valid. They just say they're biased. They're looking at it from a Western viewpoint. They don't understand. That's not true. The people who do this are highly competent, highly skilled. They do understand. It's done with great care. These researchers are high quality. They know what they're talking about. But it's easy for all of this to be dismissed. These are facts. I've often said that. There are times when I am ashamed and embarrassed by the ways of Christianity and the ways and behavior of some churches today, and certainly churches of the past. But I think that's a great principle to apply. We're living in a world of persecution. 2 great principles in the Qur'an. That's taught in the Qur'an, specifically in 2 direct places. You don't question it, you do it. And the extremists in Syria or Nigeria or whatever, they think they're following it, and they probably are. That is widely held in the Islamic world. It's taught, it's impressed upon children from earliest days. And there are policies that are being run by Islamic so-called research centers whose aim is simply to help to achieve that supremacy, to present Islam as the best way. Now these 2 principles have consequences. The Qur'an is seen as the law of God from which Sharia law comes. Islam is God's perfect religion. Everything else is unacceptable. Therefore, you do everything possible to discourage every other religion. That's the basis of persecution. And anything that helps Islam is good. And anything that hinders Islam is bad, is lies. So you've got a new definition of truth and lies, a new definition of good and evil. That all stems from and all underpins, and this has come directly from Islamic teaching, widely held. How do the Muslims in Britain today see things? There have been massive surveys done again by highly reputable, neutral, non-religious organizations. Amazingly, over a quarter had sympathy with those who killed the Charlie Hebdo staff. 1 in 10 believe that anyone who publishes images of the Prophet should be attacked. Violence. 1 in 5 have got some sympathy with those who've left the country to join IS fighters in Iraq and Syria. Over a quarter would prefer Sharia law in Britain. Sharia law is very, very different from the laws of the West in any system. It's not a minor change. It is a dramatic difference. If you leave Islam, nearly 1 in 5 think your family should just cut you off. But if you convert to another religion, nearly 1/3 of British Muslims believe that the person should be punishable by death. Now this is actual data gathered by a reputable organization. Depending just how views are seen, it ranges there that Muslims in Britain think that their views clash with British values. And so it's between roughly 1/6 and 1/3. Roughly 13% of the Muslims in Britain have genuinely assimilated into the culture. A further 44% have assimilated a bit, but they've retained their ethnic culture, their Islamic culture as well. The two just go side by side. These are just facts. What about Muslims throughout the world? 70%. Now I suggest you go and look at Sharia law and just see what the implications of that would be. It is very different. That is frightening. 4 in every 10 favour people being publicly whipped or the amputation of hands for those who have committed crimes of theft. 4 in 10 favour stoning for adultery. Stoning is not a quick death. It is not a pleasant death. It is absolutely barbaric. Over half favour the death penalty for anyone leaving Islam. They call it apostasy. 4 in 10 want total gender separation in the workplace. Nearly 50% believe in literal creationism. In other words, that the way life is today is the way it's always been. Despite all the evidence. And I find that amazing. Nearly 2/3 of Muslims throughout the world don't accept that the 9/11 bombings in the USA were carried out by Muslims. And they think it's all a CIA or a Jewish made-up plot. And I've read their documentations, but this is not a figure I've got. This is a figure done by a reputable world organization. This is a world of make-believe. Western Muslims in general 1 in 5 in Germany, which has been the most incredibly generous in accepting people from overseas. They oppose the integration and they reject German values. Germany has welcomed them in. Germany has provided things for them, and German values are being rejected. Over 50%, huge Muslim population in France, oppose intermarriage. In Canada, where the Muslims have integrated probably better than any country in the West, nearly 50% want to be ruled by Sharia law for family matters. That places women in the most dreadful position. 3/4 in Australia consider that the counter-terrorism policies by governments in Australia unfairly target Muslims. They forget the fact that you don't find Hindus carrying out terrorism this way, blowing themselves up. You don't find Buddhists doing it. You don't find atheists doing it. You don't find agnostics doing it. You don't find the followers of Jesus doing it. It only comes from extreme Muslims. And in Australia, typical of the Islamic thought form, someone else is always at fault because Islam is perfect. So the terrorism is the fault of histories of occupation and invasion of the Middle East. Now, the occupation and invasion of the Middle East is a total disgrace. And we in the West should be apologizing to these people for what we've done to them, basically, in the 20th century into the 21st century, right from the end of the First World War when the Ottoman Empire fell. France and Britain should be ashamed of what they did, along with Italy. But we've done some terrible things in recent decades. But that doesn't explain the terrorism, nor does it excuse it. Two wrongs don't make a right. Western cultures. Again, this is data gathered by major world organizations. People in Britain see the clash between Islam and British values, over 50%. This is not a good picture. Over 60% of British people, they've got a negative or wholly negative view of Islam. Now, there's a problem there. We've got to distinguish between lovely Muslim people and the significant minority of the Islamic world who are causing the problems, including a lot of religious leaders, particularly in other parts of the world, but sometimes exported here. 4 out of 5 people in Britain favour banning the full face veil in public places. %, over 2/3 of people in Britain, don't think the media and the press in general should be restricted. They can publish material and criticise religions, and indeed our media do criticise every religion with a fair degree of regularity. But they're not allowed to criticise Islam. They'll be accused of Islamophobia. But any other religion is up as fair game. But people in Britain, the vast majority, want the press, publishing houses to be free. Over 50%. If you look over the large countries of Western Europe, people think Islam is incompatible with the West. And indeed, if you carry through the logic of the Qur'an, it's incompatible with democracy. And you cannot find democracy functioning fully in Islamic states today. It is always looking over its shoulder at the religious leaders who have the ultimate power. Nearly 70%, 7 in 10, throughout Europe support the banning of the full face veil. Over 70% in France think Islam is intolerant, incompatible with French society. Despite all that French governments have done to integrate and bring things together. And in Denmark, with its highly liberal policies and world outlook, 50% of the population want a restriction on the numbers of Muslims coming into the country. We've got enough. They're causing enough problems. And they, of course, have suffered the violence through the cartoons. These are major problems that we face. Here are some more facts. Before the Iraq War, there was estimated to be 1.5 million followers of Jesus in Iraq. Today, that's all that's left, and that probably is an overestimate. I've been conservative in the numbers. It's probably near 150,000. Driven out, exterminated, forced to flee. Yet at the same time, Muslims from the West have gone in their thousands, probably tens of thousands, to support IS. These are facts. And it has a policy of extermination. And it sees this as God's will, mandated by the Qur'an. And it's not difficult to see how they could use the Qur'an to come to that conclusion. I pick this, a picture of St. Peter's Square in Rome. They're going to destroy the Catholic Church. The flag flies over it. And on that picture is the statements, break the crosses, and what I find even more frightening, trade and sell the women. Child executions are quite normal. Young lives snuffed out brutally. And young boys are trained as killing machines, totally dehumanized. And the girls, basically from the age of 9 onwards, are the sex slaves of the soldiers. These are facts. Where is our media today? But if our media did publish these too strongly, they'd be accused of Islamophobia. But we need to know. Where is our media in this? Where is the condemnation from moderate and good Islamic leadership in the West? And where can governments take action? Let's look at these very briefly. To be fair, some of our printed media have reported some of it, and there has been some positive editorial comment, but only from certain sections of the press, not the parts of the press that reach large numbers in general. But terrestrial television has tended to ignore it. Some church leaders have come out, particularly bishops of the Church of England, and I admire them for doing it. And one indeed is under a permanent police guard for threats from the Islamic world because he's come up with the facts. But essentially in our media today there is a view, and indeed it's in society, that all religions are basically the same, and they're basically the same, and they're irrational. And therefore troubles are interreligious. There's two sides to the argument. So very often they present it as interreligious strife, ignoring the fact that the strife is entirely coming from one side and not the other. They got Nigeria wrong, and they've got many other parts of the world wrong as well in this. They look at religions as irrational, and therefore interreligious strife is an irrationality that we just got to put up with. But often the truth is misrepresented because of that background. And facts have been accused because other people have accused them of being just opinions. I have faced that myself. I have presented facts. Facts presented conservatively, not exaggerations. They are not opinions. And then there's this fear of the accusation. And of course, if you stand against Islam too far, sooner or later, as people in Denmark and France discovered, and in many other parts of the world, your life is on the line. What about the Islamic leadership? I would describe it as measured and muted. Because you see, there's the danger of Islam being criticized, and that's not permitted. So very often they criticize the extremists, but it's alongside counter-accusations against other things that are utterly irrelevant and probably not true. So facts and evidence are rejected or misrepresented. Other people get blamed. And I've heard this in the media again and again, and I'm saddened that our media reporters do not challenge it with requesting evidence. You see, there is an Islamic blame culture that is totally logical. Because Islam is God's religion and it's perfect, if anything goes wrong, it must be someone else's fault. So it's colonization of the Middle East that causes terrorism. And so anything that goes wrong, it's someone else's fault. And one of the most amazing things I ever heard was our security services in this country being blamed for generating extremism in young men who are Muslims. Laughable. But it wasn't challenged. I think our media is being manipulated. Then there's the assertion that the extremists do not represent Islam. If you look at what the extremists teach, what they publish, what they present, they claim they are representing Islam, the Qur'an and Sharia law, and there is a lot of evidence that they are. That has got to be faced by the wonderful group of huge numbers of moderate Muslims. But we need leadership. But the leadership has got to be muted. Because if they go too far of criticism, they'll be exterminated. There's fear. Government action? I think governments of all colours, particularly in Britain, have been unwilling to face the facts. And it comes from a belief that all religions cause troubles, even though the evidence actually does not support that historically. There are more troubles caused by the non-religious than the religious. Now that's just a numerical fact. But they believe that, and so they get inter-religious ideas. They're all irrational, they're all foolish. So you get a government minister coming up with a statement that anyone who doesn't share the gay agenda, which is the government fashion of the moment, is a potential terrorist. Now wait a minute. It just so happens that terrorists don't share the gay agenda of the government in Britain at the moment. But the corollary is not true. There are people with great expertise. I've had the privilege of hearing one or two of them. I just wish governments would listen to these people. They really do know. But maybe governments have the belief that they can solve problems. Now, I don't know if governments do solve problems. Problems are caused by people. And there needs to be a change in people before problems are caused. And I don't think governments can achieve that. So maybe governments believe they can do something, but I suspect there's limits to what governments can do. But there's an ignorance of the Qur'an. Oh, I'm just asking, go back and read the Qur'an. Look at it. Look at the scholarship. It will open your eyes. So there's a blind acceptance amongst government and amongst advisors of government of what basically I call Islamic propaganda. Get back to the evidence, get back to the facts, not my opinions or anyone else's opinions. There are enormous research sources out there. The evidence is there. Let's get back to the facts. Let's look at what the documents actually say. We started with that. Christianity is gaining ground in the world. In many countries, the leadership is really quite weak. They're afraid of their base, their power base, and they love power being weakened. And that's not only political leadership, but religious leadership. And there's a terrible desire amongst governments and religious leaders for conformity. Do it my way. gives me power. And in many countries, there are laws set up by governments or by religious leaders that militate against, particularly, the followers of Jesus. And in many countries, the followers of Jesus, some wonderful and glorious leaders, have lost their lives this way because they stood against the abuse of humanity through drugs, human trafficking, exploitation, abuse of women, and so on. And they paid the ultimate penalty. But it all goes back to insecurity. That's the root problem. When anyone is insecure in any area of life, there is a great temptation and tendency to seek to put others down, to bolster yourself up. That is a sign of insecurity. You'll see it in the social, normal round of life. But you'll see it with governments. They will pick on some minority or some group in society, put them down in an attempt to lift themselves up. You see it with religions. You see it even within Christianity, but it tends today never to go to violence. And that is right. But you see it particularly with religions like Islam and Hinduism and Buddhism. Hinduism and Buddhism are losing ground rapidly numerically. Islam is holding its own roughly at the same pace of Christianity, of growth. But most of its growth is biological rather than reaching new people. But Islam at the moment is going through a period of intense insecurity that they're not aware of. Therefore they have to put down anything and everyone and every other system that they perceive as a threat. And the biggest threat they see is the way of Jesus. Insecurity, the basis of persecution.